false choice as between business and labor, as between economic growth and economic fairness, to have a grand compact, as you might say, between business and labor to grow our economy in a way that's kind of fairer to all. Is, I think, the right way to think about this.
Great. Austin, CAP put forward ideas today on essentially a jobs guarantee, a big investment in infrastructure, but also thinking through kind of a new vision of infrastructure. I'd love your thoughts on that, but also we definitely want to talk about positive ideas, but I don't want to lose sight of the kind of Trump agenda a little bit, so I'd love for you to talk about both of those issues. Okay,
if you haven't read the report, you should. It's very interesting. It's kind of talking about both of these aspects. And it's about inclusive growth and how do you invest in your people, invest in your infrastructure. If that is the grand vision, let us return to the grubby reality of the Trump tax plan and what are the ideas behind it. I think the root of the problem began in the campaign, and we knew that, which was on health care. They asked Donald Trump, Sean Hannity asked Donald Trump. He said, you've been criticized for not having specifics. You say you want to repeal and replace Obamacare. What specifically would you replace it with? And he said, something fabulous. That was his answer. Now, if you come to the presidency with the idea list, I want to do something fabulous for health care, for tax policy, and those, you open yourself up, not to blackmail from the Russians, but you are
that's possible. That's possible.
To delegation from Congress. They're just going to give you ideas and say, hey, we've been pushing this for 30 years. Why don't you make that your plan? The Trump tax plan, as has been outlined, would be the biggest tax cut for very high-income people in the history of the United States. By far, more than twice as big as George W. Bush's tax cut was, which, if you're old enough, you remember we all said, if not in this very room, we all said together that the country cannot afford to do this. This is a terrible idea. This would be twice as big as that. It would create the biggest loophole ever in the history of the U.S. tax code by allowing anyone that has a private business to call that profit, and they will have to pay only 15% marginal rate on that. Now, just to put that in perspective, if you are a regular American worker who's currently filing, say you're a single parent, so you're filing as a head of household. If you make $38,000 a year, you will have to pay, he's going to get rid of head of household. You will file as a single person. You will pay a 25% marginal rate plus another 7.5% or so of payroll tax. So you're going to pay a 30+% marginal rate, while somebody who literally made $1 billion a year will be paying a 15% rate. It doesn't make any sense. And the thing that I can't understand is, how do you look at the last 30 years of the economic history of the United States, in which we've had a decline of manufacturing and working people, in which we've seen an increasing divergence between productivity and profits of large corporations and what they pay people, and the erosion of the social compact. How do you look at the 30 years of history and say the thing we were missing is we didn't cut billionaires' taxes enough and run up the deficit enough? That's the premise of the plan. The basic worldview, I think, is that we have to have growth. We have to. If we want to restore what we had in the past, we must grow again. And it might be in manufacturing, it might be EMTs like Lindsay, it might be services, but we have to grow. And there is a difference of worldviews of where growth comes from. And one worldview says growth comes from the absence of government. That if we just get rid of all the regulations and rules of the road and cut the tax rates, then growth will come. And if you believe that worldview, I think you have a puzzle, which is, why is Silicon Valley in California? A place which doesn't have low taxes, doesn't have low regulation, never has. It's not on the island of Vanuatu, which is somewhere in the Pacific, and there are no taxes of any kind on Vanuatu. There are no capital gains taxes, no income taxes, no corporate taxes at all. Sometimes when I talk about Vanuatu, people will come after, where is this island of Vanuatu? Look, why isn't it on Vanuatu? You know why. It's because the dynamic, innovative companies in the United States do not primarily move to Silicon Valley or New York City or wherever they go because it's cheap. They go there because they can't afford not to go there. Because those are places where they've invested in people, where there's high human capital, where the economic infrastructure is strong, and that's not free. Investing in your economic infrastructure and your people is not free. It does require tax revenue. It does require the government to invest in education and science and all the things that we need to grow. And that, I think, is what the fight is really about.
Senator Merkley, just briefly, one of the things that we've seen over the last 30 years, in addition to one vision of taxes, is an erosion of the ability of all workers to demand higher wages for their human capital. So one of the challenges there has been the erosion of unions in the United States. I wanted to ask you to talk briefly about that, and then I'm going to turn to Lindsay to talk about her experience.
Oh, you bet. And I think what we've been describing is that Trump, in the health care plan and in his tax plan, is a billionaire's first strategy. And what we're talking about here is developing a workers' first strategy. It's a dynamically different approach to this world. Trump may have talked about workers in his campaign, but the reality on the ground is billionaires first. And an extraordinary tax giveaway with 24 million people losing health care, extraordinary one-page summary of a $6 trillion, I believe, tax giveaway over 10 years. And so, but let's return to this question then of the power of workers. What I described before was how the loss of manufacturing undermined the leverage of workers to fight for good wages, but it also undermined the organizing power of workers to lose those concentrations of factory workers. And we had, from the time of Reagan forward, a deliberate assault by the most powerful people in the country to dismantle unions. It was a strategy of taking the 1%, saying, hey, if we're going to rule this place, we have to divide the rest of the country. We have to do rural America against urban America. We have to divide, if you will, government unions against non-government labor unions. We have to blame and split working America into pieces so that we can continue to write the rules. And a big piece of that was this assault on unions. What we saw when unions thrived was that workers got a full measure, a fair measure of the wealth that they were creating. And they're not getting that fair measure today.
Lindsay, we've been talking about a lot of theories here, but I also just wanted to really make it kind of real to people in a sense. You're organizing, and I wanted to just give a sense to the audience of why you're doing that and why you think it matters to you and your family.
Well, thank you for having me. Just a little bit. My name's Lindsay. I'm 26. I've been at UMT for about a year now, here in D.C. Sorry, I don't do this often. So we decided to organize because we had three main issues. We wanted fair pay, fair schedules, and working equipment. Because we, as far as working equipment, we are our patients' primary providers. Without working equipment, we can't give them the best care possible. And that's something that's really important, because if we can't give you care, we're not doing our jobs effectively. As far as scheduling, we wanted to, excuse me.
Don't worry. Take your time.
We wanted fair schedules. We wanted to be able to go to the doctors. We wanted to spend time with our families. We wanted to be able to do panels like this without having to worry about, oh, can I take off work? Do I have enough leave to take off work? You know, who's going to cover my shift? And pay. Pay being probably the most important for everyone, not just me, but probably everyone in this room. We wanted better pay because we wanted to invest in ourselves and invest in our futures. I wanted to be able to go back to school and get my paramedic certification, and without better pay, I can't do that. You know, I eventually want to be able to buy a house, and pay is essential to that. So we felt that if we all came together, we would have a strong voice, a stronger voice, because one person can go to the management team, but that's one person. But when everyone comes together for the same common goal, it really gives you power, and it's a driving force. It opens the lines of communication with your management team, and it says to them, wow, they're organized. They really, you know, we have to kind of give them what they want, because without them, we can't serve our community. We can't get paid. So that was really why we chose to organize.
Thank you so much. Austin, great. Yes, no, please.
Good job.
Good luck. Austin, Lindsay's story it tells us about, you know, one example. But what we've seen, and we demonstrate a little bit in our paper we put out today, is that for a lot of folks, really the bottom 50% of folks, over not few years but decades, have really been unable to get higher wages for their work, as you're trying to do. What are the trends you see that's driving that? And then I think I'll ask one question about manufacturing and then go to the audience questions.
I mean, there are numerous trends pushing that. I'd say at an abstract level, the fact that the growth of productivity in the United States for 75, 100 years always went into wages. Sometime around the 1980s, that breaks. And if you look at the graph, it looks like productivity and growth continuing on average to go up while wages staying flat. And for different people, you know, even 50% of people actually going down. Some feel that the decline of unions and worker bargaining power is an issue. There is a globalization issue. There is, I think, probably the automation and technology is a more important factor maybe than until recently we've given credit to, because it's worth remembering something like 80+% of the U.S. economy doesn't face foreign competition. It's domestic services. So there are a lot of things going on, but the facts are undeniable that people getting paid for their human capital, people being paid in a way sharing in the bounty that has been the increase in profits and the increase in GDP, that sometime 20, 30 years ago begins to break, and by now they've really diverged pretty significantly.
Glenn?
So I think to answer these questions, we need to look forward, not back. The economy that Lindsay is living in is very different than the economy that your parents lived in. And I would argue it's for another time. The period from 1945 to 1975 was an anomaly in American history, resulting from the fact that at the end of World War II, the United States had the only productive labor force facing the only productive capacity in the world. That fundamentally changed in the late 70s when Germany and Japan had rebuilt, and then fundamentally changed forever when China entered the global marketplace. And we're not going to be able to get back to that halcyon age because it was an anomaly rather than the base case. That's kind of point one. If you look at the other thing to remember is if you look at the manufacturing economy, the United States has never in its history manufactured more than we do today. 2015 compared to 1980, the United States manufactured on an inflation-adjusted basis 2.5 times as much as we did 35 years before that. We're the second largest manufacturing country in the world. We manufacture more than Germany, Japan, and Korea combined. We're second only to China. China has 4 times as many people. On a per capita basis, we manufacture far more than China does. Right? But we only employ 2/3 the number of people to do it today that we did 35 years ago. This is not about the loss of the manufacturing economy. It's about the fundamental change in the nature of the manufacturing employment in the manufacturing economy. One of the best examples of what's the industry that's had the highest increase in productivity during that time period? Mining. One of the reasons why the jobs aren't coming back to West Virginia as Trump might have promised is because mining has become so vastly more efficient than it was 35 years ago that it takes that many fewer people to do it. And it's also migrated from West Virginia to the Powder River Basin in Wyoming, where it's much more efficient, and it's migrated from coal to natural gas. Those are all fundamental changes that no kind of public policy is going to address. You layer on top of that this fundamental change in work that Mayor Garcetti talked about as a result of the technology revolution. And we have to think in very, very different ways around the kind of the social compact we have for people who are of a working age, what jobs they're going to do and what social supports we offer them so we can have fairness in our economy independent of whether or not we have kind of manufacturing or blue-collar jobs that we need to create as a result of creating greater economic growth. I think we need to detach some of these social equity measures that we've talked about, minimum wage, expanded EITC, all the things we've talked about, college affordability, from work, because work has fundamentally changed in the economy in which we live today. Is fundamentally changing for the future that we face.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons why we've proposed a sort of larger scale investment in infrastructure and more job creation is in part because we have this long-term trend, you know, there is an important social aspect to the dignity of work, and we need to think through bolder ideas about ensuring that. I wanted to see, Senator Merkley, if you have any last comments before we turn to the audience.
Well, I think it's important to recognize, yes, the economy is very different today, but in every community in America, when your Oreo factory goes to Mexico because they're getting paid $1.35 an hour, when your truck construction factory goes from Portland, Oregon to Mexico because the workers are getting a few dollars a day, those are real losses. And for those who are in the elite who say this just doesn't matter, it really matters on the ground, because it is not just the factory, it is the supply chain, it is the payroll, and it is the downward pressure on everyone else. Now, automation, when I came to the U.S. Senate, I started talking about automation. I talked to economist after economist who said, oh, you're just a Luddite. We've always had automation. It's always increased. And I said, no, this is different. It's affecting every part of the economy. I can show you a dairy in Oregon where the proprietor says, I don't really want to give you this tour because the cows are not used to seeing a human. And it's extraordinary. I mean, nobody feeds them. The machines feed them. The machines sweep up the manure. The machines milk them. No human involved. It's an extraordinary thing to see. And if you can have a dairy like that, what is it that human hands can touch that can't be done by a machine? So this is a very big and different place. Still, I would rather have that truck factory. I would rather have that Oreo bakery here in the United States. And so it is a piece we still have to wrestle with it, and it does help drive the inequality, because we have this shifting measure from what was spent on labor versus capital. And now it's capital and a modest amount of labor. It's going to be a big challenge, and we have to think, therefore, dramatically how we restructure, how we create these living wage jobs, which is what your proposal today is all about. How do we create those living wage jobs in this very different economy?
Thank you. Great. We want to take audience questions. Just identify who you are. I hope we'll get a mic to you. One's coming over there. Oh, great to see you, sister.
Nice to see you. Hi, I'm Sister Simone Campbell from Network. We got some fame from none of us. I know that. One of the issues that hasn't been addressed is the tax rate for the mega wealthy, for people at the top. And when I look at tax policy, it seems like our corporations, even when they export the factories in the globalized economy, the top of the corporations keep getting larger and larger salaries, bonuses, and less taxes. I am concerned that the piece that's not being addressed is current tax policy, where profitable businesses could pay their workers a living wage, but choose instead to pay top executives for what for me is absorbently outrageous salaries, and that the distribution is promoted by our tax policy, and that this needs to be seriously addressed if we are ever going to get to this idea that profitability depends on the workers, and the workers should share in that resource. And I'm curious, one, why that hasn't come up, and two, what you think of the argument.
Well, Austin did talk about tax policy. There has been a big divergence, obviously, between what corporations are actually paying in taxes and a sense of how much they're contributing to deficit reduction, other issues, but also, obviously, the issue of CEO salaries, but also valuing shareholders over others. Austin, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, look, the good sister has put it very well. That is, we have designed, not under President Obama, but in the Republican presidents, they have designed the tax code in a way that accentuated and made dramatically worse what are these underlying trends. So whatever you think, there is a technology component, there is a bargaining component, we can argue about what caused it, but nobody can dispute this thing was already happening, and they have transformed the tax code, and they are attempting to transform the tax code now to just pile it on. And I don't really understand, I understand why large corporations, for example, would want lower taxes. Just like anybody would want lower taxes. But I don't understand the moment, which is the premise of lowering the corporate tax is if you could increase the profitability of companies, then they will invest more, they will hire more, they will pay more. That's the premise. But it's worth noting, if you just look at the data, corporate profitability already went up. It's at the record levels it has ever been as a share of GDP. Corporate profits to income ratio is up more than 50%. Even the biggest corporate tax cuts are not going to increase profits more than that. And so the question of why, when corporate profits are that high, if you think that's going to lead to massive employment and massive pay, it would already have done so. So I think that there's a disconnect between the philosophy that says, hey, just get rid of all the taxes and we can be as successful as Vanuatu. I think the data don't really support that view.
Sarah Merkley?
Well, if you're going to address taxes, you have to recognize the concentration of power in America. And when we look at our campaigns, for example, you have a vast amount of money flooding from the billionaire enterprises of America. And it's the equivalent of a stadium sound system that drowns out the voice of ordinary Americans. And that disproportional role has been affirmed by Citizens United. If you want to understand why the very first time in our U.S. history a Supreme Court seat was stolen from one administration and delivered to the next, it has to do with concern that there would be a 5-4 change in a decision regarding Citizens United, the role that corporations can play in our campaign system. So as we talk policy, we also have to talk about policy and power, and we have to be willing to have a grassroots operation and embrace it, and in partnership with an inside game inside the building. If you don't have that inside-outside force, and by the way, a huge thanks to Grassroots America, because it's Grassroots America that torpedoed the health care plan that would have thrown 24 million people out off of health care in America.
Do you have other questions? Fair? Get there quickly.
Craig Kaplan. It's funny. I mean, I agree with everybody. That having been said, to pick up on one of the points, and since this is an ideas conference, if we accept the premise, as has been said, slightly different from what you said, Senator, that the major problem that we are dealing with over the long next 15, 20 years is a technological revolution, and questioning the premise that the change in technology will ever produce the numbers of good-paying jobs that we need. if we use the traditional definition of jobs and questioning the premise that there has to be a social value in work as we define it. Isn't the question a redefinition of work in some sense, and what social contribution is, and what is compensable labor? Because if we live with the traditional notion, what do we say to all of the truckers who will now be replaced by automatic cars, the cab drivers? And this is just the beginning of that kind of change. We need to disconnect the economic questions from the social contributions, and I'd love your thoughts.
So I will briefly just say I really hope you read our paper today on this very topic. I will just say for CAP, but I will definitely let the panelists speak, that I think that we dismiss the dignity that people take in having a job at our peril. And that is why we have proposed a pretty expansive jobs investment. There are conversations about UBI and other issues, but I think when you look at the data of people who are currently unemployed and are already receiving SSDI, I think most folks would recognize that having so low job attainment is a problem for our society and our economy. But I'll let anyone on the panel want to respond to the broad point of how we redefine work.
I guess I don't disagree with the philosophical and the UBI and others are interesting conversations. I hope we don't write off getting regular jobs as we define them too quickly. I think the economy has proved a remarkable engine over 200 plus years at generating real jobs, and the question of what people are going to do is one that we do have to sort out, but I think we want to make sure that they're being well paid, for what they're doing. And in this report, if you read it, it's the jobs guarantee is going to get a lot of headlines, but there's a lot in this report in which it goes through, look, we want to invest to move up the skill base of the workforce, and we want to have robust demand for there are a lot of people in the country who do not have a college degree now, and we need to have robust demand at various levels of the skill distribution in a way that I think would be healthy and would lead to creation of a lot of jobs. It's worth remembering, every month we generate something like 200,000 jobs. That's a net number, okay? We actually generate 5.3 million jobs in the month of March, and we lost 5.1 million jobs in the month of March. So there is an incredibly powerful engine of job creation, of actual what we normally think of as jobs. We just need to keep priming it and unleashing it.